They allow membership to the world's most exclusive sporting club, but only to a chosen few. The price of entry is pain and suffering. They are climbs such as Alpe d'Huez and the Galibier, the Tourmalet and the Haut-de-Caen. Riders who have won in these mountains have etched their names in history and achieved what only a handful of cyclists achieve each year, a win on one of the legendary climbs of the Tour de France. If the Tour de France is the highlight of cycling's year, then the climbs are truly the stars of the Tour. Every Tour champion has had to face not only the challenge of his rivals, but also the challenge of the mountains. Pure climbers like Merckx and Pantani used the climbs to forge victory, but others like Indurain and Anquetil were time trialers who hung on for dear life on the climbs. The climbs of the Tour de France are located in two main areas that bookend the storied pages of the world's greatest bike race, the sprawling Alps in southern France and the ribbon-like Pyrenees on the border with Spain. Many a rider's Tour hopes have ended on the leg-sapping, lung-bursting climbs that punctuate the Tour's three-week journey to Paris. As the Tour route rears abruptly upwards on the steep mountain slopes and the pack thins to a line of individuals against the incline, no hiding, no resting, just a slow and torturous turning of the pedals as the road disappears upwards into the thin, high mountain air.
Well, you know, when they first decided to put the high mountains, the Pyrenees, into the Tour de France, everybody said, "You're mad, you'll kill the riders, there's no way anybody can climb those mountains." And they did, of course, and it happened in about 1910, and the role the mountains played was to make this a much more challenging event. That first day in the Pyrenees, the very first time they called it the Circle of the Dead Men, because they really thought nobody would ever come out the other side. As we know now, they did, and it made the Tour de France great.
The high mountains were introduced to the Tour in 1906 when the Tour crossed Ballon d'Alsace. The euphemistically named mountain roads were little more than dirt herding tracks over which the riders were often reduced to walking their bicycles. The challenge was made all the harder as the multiple gears of today's rear derailleurs were not available until 1937. But ever since their introduction, the mountains have been the focal point of the Tour. The lure and drama of the climbs has also produced traditions and rituals amongst the spectators. The painting of names and encouragement on the road surface, the clanging of cowbells, the funnels of spectators cheering every rider, whether in first place or last. Spectators crowd in dangerously as the racers ride by, barely able to catch a breath, let alone fend off the over-exuberant fans. The cheering and noise increase as the road climbs higher. A dizzy blur of color and noise, a crescendo of sweat and excitement, which culminates in the drama and emotion of victory for the gifted and the heartbreak of physical struggle and pain for the rest of the field.
The mountains is where you see the real fans come to see the Tour de France. They get totally involved in the race. Sometimes they'll come 2 or 3 days before to get just their own specific spot on one of the major climbs. And it's actually like riding through a wall of noise. You can't hear a thing when you're riding through there. It's total chaos. And it actually, towards the summit of some of the climbs, it lifts you. It makes you accelerate as if you can't actually feel the last couple of kilometers.
As the spectators have honored the riders with painted messages and urgings, so too has the Tour itself. In recognition of the men who won in the mountains but never won overall, a classification for best climber was introduced in 1933. The infamous maillot à pois, or polka dot jersey, arrived on the scene in 1975 and has since become the most revered prize in the Tour after the leader's yellow jersey.
I always felt like if I had done well on a climb and I was still with the leaders, I felt like Godzilla. And even though I'm not a big man, I'm like 3 times the size of your typical climber. The great climbers of the Tour de France have, generally speaking, been very small men, almost like jockeys from horse racing. They're diminutive stature, but they have huge reserves of courage within their hearts.
The struggle between rider and mountain has never been more dramatically played out than during the 1967 Tour. From that July day, Mont Ventoux and the name of one rider, Tom Simpson, would be irrevocably linked in tragedy. On the climb, Simpson struggled. With about 3 kilometers to go, he began to waver and toppled off his bike. Spectators helped him back onto his bike, but a little over a mile later, he collapsed unconscious. Traces of amphetamines were found in his body. In combination with the mountain's savage conditions, Simpson quite simply rode himself to death.
Well, I knew Tom Simpson, and I wasn't on the Tour de France when he died. In fact, I was riding a bike in a race. I just finished second in that race, and I returned to the house, still in my racing strip, turned the 9 o'clock news on, looking to see the result of the Tour de France. The very first headline I heard was, British cyclist Tom Simpson dies in the Tour de France this afternoon. Couldn't believe it.
Mont Ventoux in France's Vaucluse region is a stark and dramatic setting for some of cycling's greatest battles. First included in 1951, the Ventoux rises 5,098 feet in 13.1 miles, the average grade of 7.6%, adding to its savage veneer. Starting almost from sea level, the riders must battle hot sun and incredibly high winds to the summit. Its last 4 miles are a lunar landscape devoid of trees, the bare white rock reflecting and intensifying the sun's heat.
I think the Mont Ventoux is one of the scariest climbs in the Tour de France because of the legends that surround it. Obviously, everybody knows about Tom Simpson losing his life on the slopes of those mountains. But when you climb out of the trees and up onto the rock area, it's absolutely bare. It's hot, it's barren. The wind howls across there like crazy, and it's like being on the mountains of the moon.
Although the mountain was crossed in 1994, its bleak slopes had not witnessed a finish since 1987. It was returned to the Tour de France for the new millennium, and it did not disappoint. 1998 winner Marco Pantani and defending champion Lance Armstrong fought a classic and personal battle of the egos that paved the way for the Americans' victory that year.
Well, this is an incredible demonstration of the sort I don't think I've ever seen in the Tour de France, because Armstrong is toying with the top names of the cycling world. He left them and they knew he was going because they couldn't even raise the pedal length. Now he sprinted straight past Santiago Botero and he's coming up to Pantani. And what will the Pirate do when this man gets on board?
Pantani would take the stage, but Armstrong would win the war, holding the yellow jersey all the way to Paris. Coming up, the Pyrenees, including the towering Tourmalet. From Eddie Merckx's lone break on the Tourmalet in 1969 to Lance Armstrong's show of dominance on the Hautacam in 2000, the magnificent Pyrenees have added to the Tour's mountain legend. Stretching from Biarritz on the Atlantic to Perpignan on the Mediterranean, the Pyrenees provide a natural barrier between France and Spain. They are also home to some of the most vicious climbs in the Tour. Arcalus and the Tourmalet are 2 of the 4 highest finish points in Tour history, and they provide a challenge every bit as special as their location.
There's a big difference between the 2 mountain ranges, the Alps and the Pyrenees. I've always thought the Pyrenees were much more difficult. They're smaller climbs, the roads are smaller, and the surface is even much more rough than that of the Alps. They're very difficult, and they're made even more treacherous by the descents, which are always very technical.
The Pyrenees are very difficult to ride because the roads are really narrow. They're very steep gradients that they've used to cut into the mountains, and the pavement is absolute rubbish. It's chip and seal, and when it gets hot in the Tour, it melts, and it feels like your tires are stuck into the pavements. Each climb in the Pyrenees when it's hot like that is torture.
In 1997, the Tour visited the mountain principality of Andorra. Tucked high in the Pyrenees and almost forgotten, Jan Ullrich brought it to the forefront of that year's Tour, the German stomping the mountain and his competitors into submission with a fantastic display of climbing prowess.
Now he's going to drive all the way and claim every second he can, as this wonderful little rider from Germany, a man who I think is probably the best cyclist we have seen on the bike for many, many years. He is the winner, to an enormous round of applause and whistles here.
The 24-year-old took the overall lead that day and went on to win his first, and so far only, Tour. When the Tour first crossed the Tourmalet in 1910, Gustave Garrigou was awarded 100 francs, or about $15, for being the only rider to scale the climb without putting his foot down. Located midpoint between the Atlantic and the Mediterranean, the Tourmalet lies high in the Pyrenees just inside the French border. The 6,938-foot peak was one of the first high mountains added to the Tour route, and with more than 70 ascents, the Tour has crossed this climb more than any other. Its addition to the Tour changed the nature of the world's greatest bike race. If you wanted to win, now you had to be able to climb.
The Tourmalet was one of the first mountains ever introduced into the Tour de France. The riders used to climb it, of course, when there was no road surface on it. Sometimes they finish on the top, sometimes they hairpin their way down. Either way, you guarantee you go into the clouds. This is a brute of a climb, and for the riders, one of the most feared climbs of the Tour. It always will be.
There have been some unbelievable battles on the Tourmalet, but one of the biggest ones was in 1985 when Bernard Hinault was trying to win his 5th Tour de France. Le Monde was up the road in front of him, and the team management said, "Greg, you have to stop for Bernard Hinault." But the strange thing is that Greg had been groomed over the years by Cyril Guimard to be a Tour de France winner. He was kept out of the Tour de France. He was now in a situation where he could actually win the Tour a year before he was programmed to, but the team said stop. The team forced him to wait for Bernard Hinault. He did that out of respect for the master.
Over 5 million tourists visit the town of Lourdes every year, and it seems like that many head for the hills when the Tour de France tackles the nearby climb up to the local ski resort of Hautacam at 5,000 feet. Although a recent addition to the Tour, its 8.4-mile, 8% slopes have shown that it is a tough challenge and a dramatic finishing point.
Well, Hautacam until recently was never climbed, and when Bjorn Ries found it in 1996, he used that as the ramp to destroy the field and break the image of Miguel Indurain. On that day, Bjorn Ries was simply magnificent. It was a great stretch of riding for us to watch.
To finish the first stage in the Pyrenees, the Tour de France climbed the Hautacam. Lance wanted to show that he was the deserving winner of the Tour de France, and he wanted to show Pantani and Ulrich who was the boss. He just went flat out all the way to the top, and he said, if you can follow me, go ahead and try. Of course they couldn't, and he had a huge lead at the end.
Still to come, the mighty Alps, including the Queen, Alpe d'Huez. There is no more magnificent backdrop for a bike race than the Alps. Their beauty is matched only by the difficulty of their climbs. Located at the juncture of France, Italy, and Switzerland, the Alps form a focal point for Europe's and cycling's topography. Names such as Galibier, Telegraphe, and Madeleine are as permanent in our minds as are the names of the riders so hastily painted on their slopes.
The alpine climbs to me are very special. I prefer them to the Pyrenees. They're always covered in wildflowers and nice butterflies, and they just seem to be always bathed in sunshine. The people go there for the holidays, and they go there to enjoy what to me is the special place for the Tour de France. They are special.
My nickname when I was racing was the Climber, and that was meant as a derogatory nickname because I certainly wasn't. Riding through the Alps was always magnificent, except it wasn't so great for me because I was usually 30 or 40 minutes behind, scrambling to get inside the time limit. But the Alps are beautiful, they're grandiose, they're magnificent. Unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to witness any of the great battles from the front of the main field.
With the world's eyes expectantly upon him, Lance Armstrong faced the first mountain stage of the 1999 Tour, a seldom-used climb up to the alpine village of Sestriere. And with the forecast calling for cold wind and rain, the stage was set for an epic mountaintop finish.
A physical and mental delivery here by Lance Armstrong to all of his rivals in the Tour de France. He is just going faster and faster and faster, and he is going to win this stage, and he is going to go minutes ahead of the field because of it too.
Armstrong would go on to win the 1999 Tour de France, comeback complete. A stone's throw from Grenoble and the Italian border, the cols of the Telegraphe and Galibier pack a deadly 1-2 punch. The 7.5-mile Telegraphe is smaller at only 5,137 feet. A Category 2 climb, the Telegraphe is either an intriguing warm-up or a mere hiccup, depending on which way it's traversed. It's dwarfed by its neighbor, the 8,677-foot Galibier, often the Tour's highest and snowiest point. Traversed over 50 times in Tour history, the Galibier is one of the great dames of the Tour. Almost 12 miles in length, its close to 7% grade puts it firmly in the ore category.
Well, that day in June 1996, I remember like it was only yesterday. We opened the curtains, the snow was horizontal out of the window, the wind was blowing. We were staying in Val d'Isère, and we knew the race couldn't go on. They tried to get up the mountain. I spoke to amateur cyclists who had gone up to watch the race, descending on the mountain with every piece of clothing they had on, and they were suffering from hypothermia. And by the time the riders looked at the top of the Col de Galibier, because we sent cameras up there, well, it was a sight that would have come out the middle of winter. There was no way the Tour could go on there.
When the race got to the Galibier, Jan Ullrich had the leader's jersey. He had a tremendous amount of trouble on that stage in the bad weather. He doesn't really like to race in the rain that much. He prefers the warm weather. On the other hand, Marco Pantani started the Tour de France in about 177th place in the prologue. He lost a lot of time. He was not considered a favorite. But he steadily moved up as the race got into the mountains, and he really put in a fantastic effort on that stage. In the meantime, Jan Ullrich got the flat tire, and he was unable to follow. Marco Pantani did a great ride, and really he saved the Tour de France that year in light of what was going on with the Festina team.
Just beyond the Galibier is the Col de la Madeleine. Located south of the Olympic city of Albertville, it has never been used as a finish. Crossed almost 20 times, it climbs 1,673 feet in 12.5 miles to a high point of 6,509 feet. Its location mid-stage has led to dramatic scenes not only on the climb, but in the race down its slopes to the finish in Albertville.
Every rider takes risks on the Tour de France on a descent. It's either to catch up with the leaders or to jump away and try and win the stage. But on the Col de la Madeleine a couple of years ago, Johan Bruneel overcooked it and went off the edge of a cliff. Fortunately for him, there were a few trees there, so he was able to be stopped before he plunged down sometimes 400 or 500 meters. He was dragged back up onto the road and carried on to finish the stage. The funny thing is about Johan Bruneel is nowadays he's Lance Armstrong's team manager, so when he follows Lance down some of those descents, that must go through the back of his mind.
On the Col de la Madeleine in 1997, Jan Ullrich secured his overall victory. With the help of defending champion Bjarne Riis, he dropped Pantani and chased down Varane. A year later, he was equally successful against the mountain, but unable to drop the Pirate. He would take the stage, but not the lead. Only 16 men can lay claim to a win on the most famous of all Tour climbs. Coming up, Alpe d'Huez. From the Coppi-Bartali battle here in 1952 to Pantani and Guerini in the 90s, Alpe d'Huez's 21 hairpin turns have been the stage for many epic climbing duels. At 9 miles in length and an average pitch of 9%, it is not the toughest or the longest climb the Tour covers. It is particularly decisive, however, because of its steepness. It gains 3,280 feet, and because the road ends here, it can only come as the climax of the stage. It's fair to say that no Tour de France climb has ever seen more drama or pivotal Tour moments than Alpe d'Huez.
Well, since we started going back to the Alpe d'Huez in the early 1970s, we've included it now 21 times in the last 25 years. It's become a shrine. It is where everybody wants to go to. It's the road to nowhere. It's usually in good sunshine, and the hotels at the top only open for the occasion of the Tour de France. For the rest of the summer, they're closed.
Alpe d'Huez is one of the only moments in a cyclist's career when no matter how well you're riding, you're cheered on as if you were a champion of the sport.
In 1995 and 97, Marco Pantani used Alpe d'Huez to announce himself as one of the world's greatest climbers.
The Alpe d'Huez has been regarded as a shrine for climbers over the last few years, and that's why everybody turns out to see it. And in fact, there's an unofficial record for the fastest ascent of that mountain. And in 1995, although Marco Pantani went on to win, it almost was a different result.
But the fact he is going to win the most famous day in any Tour de France and be first up to the top of Alpe d'Huez. We've seen so many great names come up here since Fausto Coppi first won back in 1952, but he's overshot the corner. That's the way the cars go, Marco. He's got the time, he's not so much worried about that now. This man is a beautiful climber, and he's proved it on the best mountain of the Tour.
Marco Pantani regarded himself as the best climber in the world, and if you are regarded as such, you have to go and win on the Alpe d'Huez. Pantani had done it once before, and he wanted to prove to everybody that he was still the fastest man up the Alpe d'Huez.
In 1999, Telecom's Giuseppe Guerini had conquered Alpe d'Huez with an amazing show of climbing talent. As he entered the closing kilometers, he faced a most unexpected challenge that almost proved harder to overcome than the epic climb itself.
Well, this was the day that Eric became a rather infamous person. He leaned out to take the photograph. Of course, looking through the lens, he had no idea Guerini was so close to him, and naturally he went the same way that Guerini tried to go round him, so they crashed, and down went Eric. The thing was that when Eric found the hotel that night and he went and apologized to Guerini, Guerini said, well, if I hadn't have won, I had the best excuse.
On stage 10 of the 2001 Tour de France, Lance Armstrong pulled off one of the great ruses in Tour history, pretending to suffer over the first two climbs of the day. When the race reached Alpe d'Huez, even Armstrong's prior heroics could not prepare us for this day's feats.
Ulrich has got no answer to this acceleration by Lance Armstrong. So Armstrong has been holding everything under those legs till the last climb. He took a look straight into the eyes there of Jan Ullrich and said, well, here I go, are you coming or not? And the answer is not.
Armstrong would win the stage by almost 2 minutes, setting the tone for his third straight Tour victory. Whether it's the mountains themselves or the spectators thronging their narrow roads, the climbs of the Tour provide vivid memories for everyone who is lucky enough to watch the athletic feats that play out on their slopes.
Well, as much as I hated riding the climbs, I think it's the best part of the Tour de France nowadays. I could never get over them myself, and I still marvel at the ride that these guys can do. When you see them ride for 130 or 150 miles and finish at the top of a mountain, it is so majestic, and to me that's what the Tour de France is all about. It's the mountains.
The decision almost 100 years ago of race organizer Henri Desgrange to add the mountains of the Alps and Pyrenees to the Tour de France was a move that not only changed the face of the race, but turned it from a back-breaking slog around the French lowlands into one of the world's greatest sporting events. To conquer the climbs of the Galibier, the Tourmalet, Mont Ventoux, and Alpe d'Huez, to face the challenge and slay the inner doubt of every athlete is a quality unique to the Tour de France and her epic climbs.